This is a quick video of our intelligent document parsing solution, which does text recognition, converts that text into reusable objects within the EPC repository, and associates all the content together to build up your repository processes, libraries, and hierarchy structures automatically. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually log into the server that I want to parse this content into. And when I log in, it actually brings up the different environments that I have access to, as well as the different languages, meaning the content that I want to bring in into which language. Because our system supports 160 different languages, I could either import one SOP into English and then update the same SOP into Spanish, bringing in a second document. Or I could, if I don't have a translated version of that regional SOP, I could bring it in once and then leverage the auto translation features within EPC to then translate it once it's actually sitting in the repository. So the first thing I'll do is actually go ahead and navigate and select the document, which, as you can see, is a standard PDF document. That is a standard operating procedure with no real formatting associated to it. And the first task that I need to do is decide whether or not I want to update an existing process or create a new one. Now, updating is a good use case whereby if you manage your Visio flowcharts independently of your text-based procedures, you can import the Visio flowcharts using our Visio import feature and then update the procedures associated to every step using the SOP parser solution. So in my case, though, I'll give an example whereby we're not actually updating, we're creating a new process from scratch based on the content that we're importing. So when I go ahead and select that document, you see now it's rendered it, so I can actually visualize that document real time as the rules are being applied to the system. And the first thing I need to do is actually go ahead and ignore certain pages. So now I don't need to ignore any, but obviously improve the quality of the input if I could ignore things like cover pages, table of contents, appendices, anything I really don't need. In my example, I'm just really going to ignore the cover page. After that, it is quality content. The other option I have below is to upload a template. So this would have been if we've already defined a template, meaning I already created a template based on a similar document that we've parsed historically. You do not need to do these steps every single time. You can do it once and then apply it to 500 documents. That's really the benefit. The idea here is you can define different templates based on different document structures. Imagine a corporate versus a subsidiary or an acquisition. They may be completely different in terms of the structure of the document. So the next step is actually to go ahead and define the headers and footers. So the value of defining headers and footers is actually to ignore, again, certain content that we do not want to import into the repository. Why? Because it's going to be repetitive and it's not content that we actually need. So I'll go ahead and apply that across the entire document. And then the next step is actually to go ahead and tag some of the content. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the top process within this doc. And in this case, the second level is actually a sub-process, and that is the role that's associated to that process. In this case, it's actually a risk and a control that mitigates that risk. And finally, this is actually not the description of the risk control, but actually to the process. So automatically, the system will recognize the procedures associated to its parent, so I don't actually need to define that. But in this case, it's not its parent, it's a level up. Another thing I'm going to do is tag it to know that 3 levels is actually another level deep. So it's another sub-process. And in this case, it's a role associated to that sub-process. And once again, in this case, the actual description of that sub-process. So now I do not need to go ahead and define this throughout the entire document. What I've done is I've given it some simple rules that can be reusable. And it's already parsed the content to then go ahead and apply these rules throughout the entire document. And as you can see, it's now fully parsed with all of our rules across the entire document in terms of the definitions of the rules we've applied. The next thing I'm going to do is say we're done with our rules. And what I'm going to do here is I actually went ahead and tagged something so that it wouldn't be picked up. You see here, there's a section of text. This allows me to go in and do any type of refinement. Either again, where it's, you see, grouping the text based on the type of text, that I could do it all at once, or I have the actual option of doing manual refinement. Manual refinement actually allows me to go in and select any piece of text and change the definition. Maybe you're not satisfied with what was actually set. So in this case, you see, I could actually go ahead and say, no, that is actually the same type of content as the related content. So this just gives the flexibility to do any cleanup work that you'd like before actually bringing it in to the repository. Another thing that it allows you to do is actually reorder. You see, you can move it and restructure your hierarchy based on the content that was, how it's going to be imported into the system. Because what it's actually doing here, you see, it's showing me the structure, and I have the ability to drag and drop that content and change the actual hierarchy. And I'll do the same thing for associations. And as this is exporting in the background, just to explain what I meant by that is, not only can you reorder the structure of the hierarchy, but you can actually validate all of the content. So in this case, you see the roles and the controls that are going to be imported. In this case, the controls, and in this case, the roles. So once we're actually done this, it's actually ran in the background, I'll go ahead and go to my server that I imported this content and refresh the page. Quickly, you'll see that it brought in this new imported folder, including that quality audit top process that we tagged with all of its sub-processes and its sub-processes, meaning, as we mentioned earlier, we build an actual hierarchy tree. We're not limited to import things flat. And the same thing goes for everything in the repository. You can import regulations or risks in a folder structure and really in an organized manner. Think of all your FDA regulations or your FAA regulations or your ISO 27000 controls. It's a great way to parse those external PDF documents that are managed by other people directly into the repository. So now that I actually have this process structure here, what you'll quickly notice as well, I have the list of all the processes, sub-processes, and tasks with their associated descriptions and procedures that have already been imported, as well as the associated roles, controls, and risks. So everything is also interrelated already. And if I want to get any more information about any of this, right, if I clicked on the actual audit head, it brings me into the organizational module, which I can quickly see every task that was actually associated to that role, all at the same time. And then, of course, click directly to that task or sub-process within the overall bigger picture. So now I'm at the audit assignment, and I can see the description associated to it, including, again, the audit head role. If I go up a level, up to our top level, and then actually go ahead and load that graph, what we can see here, that it's built the end-to-end flow chart, including all the relationships, meaning, again, the description, the risks, the controls, and the roles. So those roles, that audit head, as you can quickly see, is also the swim lane, meaning the reusable role that's associated to all the different sub-processes or tasks within that level. Moreover, is actually you have the ability to expand those sub-processes at any level. So I can see within this sub-process that the audit team selection, and I can pull up the description of that sub-process level details as well. So it's built out the end-to-end flow chart with all of its relationships and details automatically. And in the same respect, you have your full digital SOP that has been created right within a couple of clicks, meaning that entire PDF document is now available in a digital form, available online, fully searchable on your phone, including all of the roles and responsibilities at every level. So if I here were to extract the summary, you see it actually built an entire RASI matrix based on the processes and other sub-processes that it can generate in a single view. But overall, be able to read this end to end in terms of all the details associated with every task. And to the same point is that if you actually wanted to see all the touch points of a single role, not only can you see it within the impact tab. So if I click again on the admin lead auditor, right? Again, we have everywhere it's being used below, but we also have all of the roles, as you can see, loaded centrally within the org module. And against all of this information, we can see all the touch points within a specific role. So if I click on the lead auditor, actually that same role was linked to multiple different sub-processes during this import. And you can actually extend all the information associated with any of those sub-processes as well, meaning audit scheduling and announcement actually had the rights and obligations risk and to monitor control information as a control that mitigates that risk. And if I drill into that risk that was also imported, we can see that actually that risk is also inherent within the postponement or cancellation of audits. And this control was also utilized on another process, review and approval of audit and findings. So all of this information across the entire repository was imported with all of its interdependencies. That way you can do an impact assessment. Whenever a role changes, a system changes, you can see all the downstream impacts and actually evaluate those changes. So think in the concept of a regulation is updated, automatically advise you of the new version. It will parse out that content. Then you can do an impact assessment across the organization to see whether or not you're still into conformance, and then actually trigger task downstreams for people to apply changes to all the documentation. So that's a very quick introduction to the parsing solution. Note, it's one of many ways that we can actually import content. Hopefully you take a look at some of our other videos around Visio import-export, Excel import-export, BPMN 2.0 import-export, or our ability to do our quick create any information on the fly, which allows you to fill in forms like a create task list form, and it'll automatically build this content as well. Thank you very much for your time.